Hey all, I'm here doing some first impressions with the new indie FPS game Herald of Havoc, and I'm excited to say Herald of Havoc is really good. Now I want to say up front, I did receive the game for free from the developers, so thank you to the Herald of Havoc devs. As always, I will be as objective and honest as I can be, but I wanted to be upfront in saying that I got the game from the devs with hopes that I would make a video talking about it. And luckily, I have genuinely positive things to say about it. Now, there's a lot of indie FPS games out there, and one thing I always look for is something unique that makes them stick out. Maybe there's an interesting mechanic, or it's the art direction, or maybe it's the setting. Herald of Havoc doesn't really have anything crazy going on in that department. It's pretty much just a straightforward Quake-inspired FPS, but what the game lacks in gimmicks or unique art style, it makes up for in sheer polish and playability. Now, Herald of Havoc is in early access. At the time of this video, only Chapter 1 is released, and there is a preview for Chapter 2, so things may change as the game develops. Before I get into the game, there are good setting options. An FOV slider, which can be set to my preferred 110, as well as robust mouse sensitivity settings. They give you the option to customize your gun placement, which means right in the center you go, as God intended. Aesthetically, I like the game as well. It has a pleasant, retro, low-poly art style and satisfying gun sound effects. Though I couldn't tell you what was going on in the game, as there really isn't any story, and the levels and enemies aren't entirely cohesive. Like, you aren't just fighting demons or whatever, there is a mixed variety of types of enemies here. There are also 3 difficulties: easy, medium, and hard. As someone who considers himself a veteran FPS fan, I started on hard, and this is how it went. Yeah, Herald of Havoc is quite challenging. I do think the game is fair, but I do recommend starting on medium so that you can get a grasp on how the guns work, how enemies act, where certain secrets or health areas of levels may be found, and how the general movement feels before jumping into hard. Medium starts off a little too easy, especially if you've played these kind of games before, but there are definitely areas of challenge to be found, especially in E1M6, this graveyard level, which I found to be the hardest part of Chapter 1. Herald of Havoc seems to take equal inspiration from both games like Quake and games like Painkiller, and it excels at feeling like both. The level design is more akin to something like Quake, with corridors and passages and secret areas to find that feed into more open areas and arena environments that can quickly become filled with tons of enemies, giving that Painkiller horde shooter kind of feel. It's easy to get overwhelmed at times, and you really need to stay aware of where enemies are and what enemies you are fighting. I personally really enjoy the way the levels are laid out and designed, the way the Quake-esque levels and the Painkiller-esque large arenas flow into one another. The levels can also be fairly non-linear at times, like that graveyard level again, for example, where you need to go through these various buildings to find keys and switches to open other areas as you keep returning to this central fountain which bridges all these areas. Each time you return to the fountain, new monster closets open and you find yourself needing to complete a combat arena with new enemies. You also don't get to keep every weapon you find in between levels. Your weapons restart, and you only keep the basic rifle and sword, meaning every level is carefully balanced with which guns are available, for which enemies, and which encounters. You also have health and armor pickups, and power-ups like Akimbo, which are placed in deliberate locations throughout levels. It allows the devs to kind of curtail the combat environment more specifically, since you won't just have every gun available from the start of every level. It also encourages exploration more, because you'll want to find the other guns to help you out. It also eliminates a lot of the temptation for save scumming your way through the game, because you don't have to worry about losing your guns if you die. You'll have to refine them all anyway. There's a good variety to the guns. They're your basic retro FPS affair. As I've already mentioned, you have your rifle and sword, but you also get a machine gun, shotgun, rocket launcher, and lightning gun. There are also different versions of each type of gun. For example, there are 3 different shotguns to find: a basic shotgun, the volcanic shotgun, which is essentially the super shotgun, and a Gatling shotgun. All these shotguns share the same shell ammo pool, but can be used in different situations. The standard shotgun is useful for hitting enemies at far range, the super shotgun does a ton of damage close up, and the Gatling gun is useful for spreading damage very quickly over mobs. A FPS is only as good as its shotgun, and I love the way that these shotguns feel in Herald of Havoc, especially the volcanic shotgun and the Gatling shotgun. There's so much impact to them, and they feel so satisfying to shoot off. I also really like the lightning gun. It shoots a powerful arc on an enemy that chains to the other enemies around it, doing a ton of damage. You can also arc off of dead bodies, making it incredibly useful against giant mobs of enemies. Most guns also have a secondary fire, giving you even more combat options. I actually really liked the secondary fire for the starting rifle. It shoots a beam that lights enemies on fire. The fire does damage over time, meaning that you can combo it with other guns, do a ton of damage, and even kill hard enemies rather quickly. The enemy variety is also well implemented. You have these basic melee guys and basic guys with guns. The melee guys are incredibly annoying in groups, as you can find yourself surrounded and they'll just melt you. I especially ran into the problem in arenas with little hideaways. I would get flanked from two sides and stuck between two pools of melee enemies. The basic gun guys are rough too, as they seem to have hit scan attacks, and they also just melt you if you aren't careful. Then there are these Minotaurs, which will charge you, similar to the Pinkies in Doom, the drones, which act as annoying harassment enemies that fly around and shoot you from afar. You have your fair share of tougher enemies with fast-shooting projectile weapons or energy balls that follow you around. Each enemy serves a purpose, chipping away at your health, harassing you by chasing you down, or melting you with powerful hits. You need to prioritize your targets and learn the attack tells for certain enemies to survive mixed encounters. You really need to stay on your toes and move around. If you stay in one place, you are going to die. Keep moving, jump around, take advantage of the environment. My overall favorite part of Herald of Havoc so far, though, is the movement. It feels great. It is so fluid. You move incredibly fast, and it just feels great running and strafing and jumping all over the place. It gives off Dusk vibes with the fluidity and speed, though it's not really that vertical. I would say that's my biggest criticism. There isn't much verticality to the combat environments. There are areas with platforms that you can jump on, but they aren't really like bounce pads or anything like that. I know this is only chapter 1, but I would have loved to see more bounce pads or teleporters or overall general verticality to the combat arena design. Despite that though, the movement feels incredible, and I really love how smooth it is in relation to getting around the map and strafing around combat arenas. As I said at the beginning, Herald of Havoc is still in early access, with only one full chapter out, but it's an incredibly promising start if you're looking for a classic Quake-like boomer shooter. I'll definitely be playing it as more chapters release, as I'm pretty impressed with what I've played so far. I want to say thank you again to the Herald of Havoc devs for the copy of the game, and if you're into boomer shooters, I definitely think this should be one to add to your radar. Doesn't reinvent the wheel, but it's super solid so far. Thanks for watching. Leave a like and comment. If you know of any other boomer shooters you'd like to hear me talk about, let me know in the comments, and I'll see you next time. Bye.